"You've got to be kidding me," Mark said, staring at the flat tire on his old Toyota Corolla. His voice echoed in the empty parking lot of the abandoned supermarket. It was a sweltering July afternoon, and the only company he had was the occasional buzz of a fly circling his head. "Well, what do we do now?" Rachel asked, her eyes scanning the horizon. They had been driving across the country for days, hoping to reach the West Coast before the end of the week. The GPS had led them down this desolate road, and now they were stuck in the middle of nowhere with no cell signal. Mark sighed, wiping the sweat from his brow. "We've got the spare in the trunk," he said, trying to sound optimistic. Rachel nodded, and together they began to unload their luggage. The heat from the asphalt was intense, and it made their clothes stick to their bodies like a second skin. They worked in silence, the only sounds the grunts of effort and the occasional thud of something heavy hitting the ground. As Mark pulled out the spare tire, Rachel noticed something peculiar. There, in the dusty corner of the trunk, lay an envelope with her name scribbled in her mother's handwriting. Her heart skipped a beat. Her mother had passed away a year ago, and she hadn't seen that handwriting since. With trembling fingers, she picked it up. "What's that?" Mark asked, his voice filled with concern. Rachel just shook her head, unable to form words. Mark and Rachel encounter a flat tire on a desolate road in July. Despite the intense heat, they start changing the tire using the spare from the trunk. Rachel discovers a mysterious envelope with her mother's handwriting, which brings up emotions and questions given her mother's passing a year ago. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age. Rachel unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the words that seemed to dance in the heat. It was a letter, one her mother had written but never sent. It spoke of a secret she had kept hidden all her life, a secret about Rachel's father that she had only discovered after his death. Rachel felt a cold shiver run down her spine as she read the words that seemed to whisper a truth she wasn't ready to face. The letter ended with a set of coordinates and a date. "What does it mean?" Rachel murmured to herself, looking up at Mark with a mix of fear and bewilderment. Mark, his curiosity piqued, leaned in to read over her shoulder. "It's a location," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And it looks like we're pretty close to it." Rachel's eyes widened. The date was today's date. They had stumbled upon something that seemed to be written just for them, a cryptic message from beyond the grave that was about to change the course of their journey. They decided to follow the coordinates, a decision fueled by a strange mix of grief and adventure. The abandoned supermarket faded into the rearview mirror as they turned onto a narrow, unpaved road that seemed to stretch into infinity. The Corolla bumped along, the suspension protesting with every pothole and rock. Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the landscape itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what they would uncover. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, orange glow over the barren countryside, they finally arrived at the spot. It was an unassuming patch of land, surrounded by tall grass and a few withered trees. Rachel stepped out of the car, the letter clutched tightly in her hand, and scanned the area. "What are we looking for?" Mark asked, his voice tinged with doubt. Rachel didn't have an answer. They were in the middle of nowhere, and the only clue they had was the weight of the envelope in her hand. They searched the area, pushing aside the tall grass and poking the ground with a stick they found. As the light faded, Rachel began to feel a sense of desperation. The secrets of her past were just out of reach, hidden in the dusty earth. And then, she saw it. A small, metal box, partially buried and almost camouflaged by the surrounding dirt. It was old, with a rusty lock that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Rachel's heart raced as she pried it open, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, there was a key and another letter. This one was shorter, and it spoke of a hidden compartment in Rachel's childhood home that contained the answers she sought. Their trip had taken a sudden turn, from a casual road trip to a quest for truth. Rachel knew they had to head back and find out what her mother had been hiding. The weight of the key in her hand felt like a promise that she would finally know the truth about her father. They climbed back into the car, the silence between them thick with anticipation. As they drove away from the field, Rachel couldn't help but feel that their journey had only just begun. The long drive back to the city was filled with a mix of excitement and dread. Rachel read the new letter over and over, the words etching themselves into her memory. The closer they got to home, the more she felt the pull of the unknown tugging at her. Mark tried to keep the conversation light, but Rachel's mind was racing with questions. Who was her father really? What secrets had her mother taken to the grave? When they pulled into the driveway of Rachel's childhood home, the darkness had fully settled. The house loomed before them, a silent sentinel holding secrets that had been buried for years. Rachel's palms were slick with sweat as she fumbled with the key in the lock. The door creaked open, and they stepped inside, the familiar scent of dust and old memories washing over them. They turned on the lights, casting a yellowish glow that did little to dispel the shadows. They made their way to Rachel's old bedroom, where she had spent countless hours dreaming of a life beyond the small town's borders. The room was exactly as she had left it, a testament to her mother's inability to let go. Rachel felt a pang of guilt, knowing she had abandoned this place and her mother's memories so easily. The letter had said the compartment was behind the bookshelf, and with trembling hands, Rachel began to move the heavy books aside. Mark helped her, his eyes never leaving hers, silently asking if she was okay. Behind the last book, they found a small, hidden panel. Rachel inserted the key, and it turned with a satisfying click. The compartment sprang open, revealing a stack of aged letters, newspaper clippings, and a small, worn-out photo album. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she pulled out the first letter. It was from her father, dated before she was born. His handwriting was unmistakable, the same strong, slanted script she had seen on her birthday cards and letters from her early childhood. Her heart pounded as she began to read, finally ready to face the truth that had been buried for so long. The letters painted a picture of a man torn between his love for Rachel and his duty to his country. He had been a spy, living a double life that her mother had known nothing about. Rachel felt a swell of pride and sadness as she realized the sacrifice he had made. Each page held a piece of him she had never known, each word a secret shared posthumously. The newspaper clippings were articles about his missions, some with cryptic messages scribbled in the margins. Rachel's eyes filled with tears as she realized the depth of her father's bravery. The photo album was the final piece of the puzzle. It contained pictures of her father with other agents, in exotic locations, and with a woman who was not her mother. Rachel's world tilted on its axis. The woman in the photos was beautiful, with dark hair and piercing eyes. Rachel felt a strange kinship with her, as if she could see herself reflected in her father's secret life. Mark sat beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, as she flipped through the pages, absorbing each image. The last photo was of her father holding a newborn Rachel, his face filled with a love that was both fierce and haunted. Rachel looked up at Mark, her eyes brimming with tears. "I can't believe she kept all of this from me," she whispered. Mark squeezed her shoulder. "Maybe she thought it was for the best," he said softly. Rachel nodded, knowing that she had to respect her mother's decision. But she also knew that she had to honor her father's legacy, to understand the man he was and the choices he had made. With a deep breath, Rachel closed the album and stood up, ready to embrace her newfound history. They had a story to piece together, a journey that would take them far beyond the confines of the dusty road trip they had set out on. The adventure had only just begun. They decided to spend the night at Rachel's childhood home, the house now filled with whispers of the past. Rachel lay in her old bed, the letters scattered on the floor around her, her father's words echoing in her mind. She had so many questions, so much she wanted to know. Mark lay beside her, his arm wrapped protectively around her waist, his breathing steady and calming. In the quiet of the night, Rachel felt a strange peace settle over her. They had uncovered a piece of the puzzle, but the picture was still incomplete. The next morning, Rachel woke to the sound of Mark making coffee in the kitchen. She stretched, her muscles sore from the tension of the night before. She padded downstairs, the floorboards creaking under her feet. The smell of brewing coffee filled the air, and Rachel felt a small spark of hope ignite within her. They had a mission now, a purpose that went beyond their own lives. They were going to unravel the mystery of Rachel's father, and in doing so, perhaps find closure for both of them. With renewed determination, Rachel picked up the letters and clippings, her mind racing with questions and theories. Mark joined her at the kitchen table, his eyes filled with a mix of excitement and concern. "What's our next move?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Rachel looked down at the paper in her hand, the words blurring together. "We need to find out who this woman is," she said finally. "And why my mother kept all of this hidden." Mark nodded, his hand finding hers. "We'll do it together," he promised. And with that, they set forth on the next leg of their journey, their bond stronger than ever. They had a past to uncover, a truth to reveal, and a future to rebuild, armed with nothing but a handful of clues and a burning desire to know. The secrets of Rachel's family were about to come to light, and she was ready to face whatever lay ahead. They spent the morning researching online, piecing together the fragments of Rachel's father's life. The woman in the photos had a name, and Rachel felt a strange mix of anger and curiosity towards her. Who was this woman who had shared her father's secrets? Rachel's mother had always spoken so fondly of her father. Had she known about his double life? The more they dug, the more questions arose, each one more intriguing than the last. By lunchtime, Rachel had compiled a list of names and places, a map of her father's shadowy world. Mark suggested they visit the local library to look for more information, to get a sense of the community her father had been a part of. The library was a treasure trove of forgotten knowledge, and Rachel felt a strange kinship with the dusty books and yellowed pages. They found an old high school yearbook with her father's picture, and Rachel stared at the young man with the same eyes as hers. He looked so carefree, so full of life. Mark pointed out an article in the local paper, detailing a high school sweetheart of Rachel's father, a girl named Linda. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. Could she be the woman in the photos? The librarian, a kind-faced woman with a knowing smile, led them to a section filled with archives of the town's history. "Your father was quite the local hero," she said, her voice filled with admiration. Rachel felt a lump form in her throat as she read about his accomplishments, his bravery, his sacrifice. As they dug deeper, Rachel found a newspaper article about her father's disappearance, the words etched in her mind forever. It had been labeled as a tragic accident, but Rachel knew now that it was anything but. The article mentioned a government cover-up, a story that had been buried alongside her father's secret life. Rachel's eyes searched the page, looking for any mention of the woman, of Linda. And there she was, a line at the end that spoke of his widow, Rachel's mother, and an unidentified woman who had been with him at the time of his death. Rachel felt a cold hand grip her heart. Who was this woman? Was she the one her mother had feared? The one her father had loved in secret? The air in the library grew thick with unspoken truths and the whispers of a past long buried. Rachel knew that their next step was to find Linda, to get the answers she desperately needed. But as they stepped out into the blinding sunlight, Rachel couldn't help but feel a twinge of fear. What would they uncover? What secrets would they reveal? They climbed back into the Corolla, the car now a symbol of their quest, and headed for the address they had found, the final piece of the puzzle that was Rachel's father. The town was quiet, almost too quiet, as if it too was holding its breath, waiting for the truth to be told. Rachel's grip on the steering wheel tightened as they approached the house, the curtains drawn and the lawn overgrown. This was it, the place where her father's other life had been hidden. The door creaked open, and Rachel stepped inside, her heart racing. The house was empty, a ghostly echo of a life that had once been lived here. The air was stale, filled with the scent of memories long forgotten. Mark followed close behind, his hand resting on her shoulder, ready to catch her if she faltered. They moved from room to room, searching for any trace of Linda, any clue to her whereabouts. In the back of her mind, Rachel wondered if they were too late, if the woman she sought had already moved on, leaving no trace behind. But then, in a dusty corner of the attic, she found it. A box filled with photos, letters, and mementos, all belonging to her father and Linda. Rachel sank to the floor, her eyes devouring each item, her heart breaking with every new revelation. The letters spoke of a love that had never died, a bond that had endured through the years of secrecy and danger. Rachel felt a strange mix of jealousy and understanding. Her mother had loved her father with all her heart, but she had never known the man behind the mask. Rachel read through the letters, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. Her father had been a hero, not just to the country but to the woman who had shared his heart. In one of the letters, Rachel found a locket with a picture of a young Linda inside. The woman looked so much like Rachel that it was uncanny. Rachel clutched the locket to her chest, feeling a connection she had never felt before. This woman was a part of her history, a part of her father that she had never known. Mark sat beside her, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and admiration. "You look just like her," he said softly. Rachel nodded, her throat tight with emotion. They spent hours in that attic, piecing together the story of Rachel's father and Linda. It was a tale of love and loss, of duty and sacrifice. Rachel felt like she was getting to know her father for the first time, the man who had loved her enough to leave everything behind for her sake. The letters spoke of his regret, his longing to be a part of Rachel's life. Rachel's heart ached as she read the words, knowing that she had missed out on so much. But amidst the sadness, there was also a glimmer of hope. Rachel found a map, with a red X marked in a town several hours away. The note attached read, "For Rachel, when you're ready to know the truth." Rachel's eyes widened. Her mother had left her a trail, a path to follow. The adventure wasn't over, it was just beginning. With a newfound determination, Rachel packed the box and the map into the car. They had a destination now, a place where they could finally lay their father's ghosts to rest. The drive was quiet, the weight of the revelations heavy in the air. Rachel's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. What would they find in this town? Would it hold the answers she sought? The road stretched out before them, a ribbon of asphalt leading to the unknown. Rachel's hand rested on the box, feeling the warmth of her father's love through the worn cardboard. She had a purpose now, a quest that was both terrifying and exhilarating. As they approached the town, the landscape began to change. The barren fields gave way to rolling hills and lush forests. The GPS announced their arrival, and Rachel felt her heart race. This was it. The town looked like something out of a postcard, with its white picket fences and quaint little shops. Rachel and Mark drove slowly, taking in the sights, searching for the place that had been marked on the map. It was a small cemetery, nestled at the foot of a hill, the graves old and weathered. Rachel's heart skipped a beat as she spotted a fresh bouquet of flowers on one of the graves. They parked the car and made their way through the cemetery, the silence only broken by the chirp of crickets and the rustle of leaves. Rachel's eyes scanned the headstones, searching for a name she had only just learned. And there it was, a simple stone with the name Linda etched into the marble. Rachel's knees buckled, and Mark caught her before she could fall. She had found her. Rachel knelt beside the grave, the locket in her hand, feeling the warmth of the setting sun on her back. For a long time, they stayed there, Rachel talking to the woman she had never met, sharing her fears and her hopes, her love and her anger. Mark sat beside her, his hand on her back, offering silent support. Rachel felt a strange peace settle over her as she finally understood the truth about her father. He had loved her, and he had loved Linda too. Rachel knew that she couldn't change the past, but she could honor their love by embracing the truth and moving forward. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the cemetery. Rachel stood up, the box of memories in her arms. She knew what she had to do. They would leave the box with Linda, a testament to their father's love and the life he had led. They placed it at the foot of the grave, the letters and photos a silent story of a life cut too short. Rachel whispered a final goodbye and turned to leave, her hand in Mark's, their journey far from over. As they exited the cemetery, Rachel spotted a figure in the distance. A woman, her dark hair blowing in the breeze, walking slowly towards them. Rachel's heart leapt. Could it be? Mark's grip tightened as Rachel took a step forward, her legs unsteady. The woman looked up, and Rachel's breath caught in her throat. It was Linda. Linda's eyes widened as she saw Rachel, the locket clutched in her hand. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the years of secrets and pain hanging heavy in the air. And then, with a tremble, Rachel spoke. "I'm Rachel," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Your daughter." Linda's eyes filled with tears, and she took a shaky step forward. Rachel felt a warmth spread through her as she was enveloped in a tight embrace, the scent of lavender and home surrounding her. In Linda's house, they talked for hours, Rachel learning about her father's life, his missions, his love for his country, and his love for her mother. Linda spoke of the pain of watching him leave, never knowing if he would return, and Rachel felt the weight of her mother's sacrifice in keeping the truth hidden. They shared stories, laughed, and cried, bridging the gap that time had created. Rachel saw in Linda's eyes the love her father had felt for both of them, a love that had transcended the boundaries of his double life. The following days were a blur of emotion and discovery. Rachel and Mark helped Linda clean out the house, filling in the gaps of Rachel's history with each dusty artifact they found. They visited the spots mentioned in the letters, the places where her father had lived his secret life. Rachel felt a strange sense of belonging, as if she were finally piecing together the puzzle of her identity. The town, once a stranger to her, now felt like a part of her very soul. And as they stood in the living room, surrounded by the evidence of a love that had survived the test of time, Rachel knew that she had found not just the truth about her father but a new chapter in her life. With Linda by her side, Rachel could face whatever lay ahead. The road trip that had started as an escape had turned into a journey of self-discovery, one that had led her to the very heart of who she was. The adventure had brought her full circle, and Rachel felt ready to embrace the future with open arms, her past no longer a shadow but a guiding light. The story of Rachel and Mark's quest for truth didn't end in that small town. It grew, branching out into a tapestry of new beginnings and heart-wrenching revelations. But as they drove away from the house that held so many secrets, Rachel looked in the rearview mirror, her eyes on the locket that now rested around her neck. Her father's love, her mother's sacrifice, and Linda's strength had all led her to this moment. And as the town grew smaller in the distance, Rachel knew that she was ready to face whatever came next, her heart full of the love that had brought her here, and the courage to carry it forward. As they traveled, Rachel began to feel a strange kinship with her father, a bond that grew stronger with every mile. The man she had known through her mother's stories had been a hero in her eyes, but now, she saw the flaws, the fears, and the love that had driven him. It was a bittersweet realization, one that filled her with both pride and a deep sense of loss. But she was determined to honor his memory by living a life that reflected the values he had held so dear: bravery, honesty, and love. The road ahead was long, and Rachel knew that the secrets of the past would continue to unfold. But she was ready, her eyes focused on the horizon, her heart open to the possibilities of what lay beyond. They had found a piece of themselves in that dusty corner of the country, a piece that had been missing for too long. And as they drove westward, the setting sun casting a warm glow on their faces, Rachel felt a peace she had never known. The truth had set her free, and she was ready to embrace the adventure of a lifetime, hand in hand with the man she loved, and the memory of the father she had just met. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotion. Rachel called her mother, her voice shaking as she shared the revelations they had uncovered. There were tears, accusations, and finally, a tentative understanding. Rachel's mother had done what she thought was best, and Rachel couldn't blame her for that. They agreed to meet, to heal the wounds that had been festering for years. Rachel knew it would be difficult, but she was ready to face the woman who had raised her with both love and lies. The reunion was tense, but the love between mother and daughter shone through. Rachel saw the pain in her mother's eyes, the weight of the secret she had carried for so long. They talked, and Rachel understood the fear and the hope that had driven her mother's actions. They cried together, and Rachel felt the burden of anger and resentment lift from her shoulders. They had come to a place of acceptance, a place where the truth could breathe and old wounds could begin to heal. Their journey had led them to a new chapter, one filled with hope and the promise of a future built on honesty. Rachel and Mark decided to move in together, their bond stronger than ever. They spoke of starting a family, of raising children who would know their history, both the triumphs and the tragedies. Rachel knew that the legacy of her father and Linda's love would live on through her, a beacon of light in the shadowy corners of her past. And so, they set out again, the open road stretching before them, a metaphor for the endless possibilities of life. Rachel clutched the locket, feeling the warmth of her father's love and the strength of her mother's sacrifice. The secrets had been revealed, the lies had been unraveled, and Rachel felt reborn. The journey had been about more than just finding answers, it had been about finding herself, about discovering who she truly was. And as they drove into the sunset, Rachel knew that she had found her place in the world, nestled between the love of her past and the promise of her future. The story of Rachel's life was no longer just a tale of loss and secrets, it was a tale of love, courage, and the endless pursuit of truth.